Our presenter this morning, Pauline Graybill Kennel, is a member of our Sojourners class. She and her husband, Leroy, moved to Goshen in 2012 and came to College Mennonite Church. She has shared her love of music and worship through both her piano and organ playing with us over these years. Her husband, Leroy, already had memory issues at the time they made the move, and Pauline was caregiver until his death on February 14, 2019. Pauline has 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. She would say they're evenly divided, 2 and 2, and 2 and 2, and 8, and 4 and 4. Many of the 9 decades of Pauline's life have been spent with music and theology. She has a BA with music from Goshen College, a Master's of Music from West Virginia University, Master's of Theology and a Master's of Divinity from Bethany Theological Seminary, and a PhD in music from Northwestern University. Pauline perhaps will share with us how the seeds of the interest in both fields of music and theology might have been sown on that Illinois farm in a Metamor Mennonite church. So she'll have to answer whether that was a part of that. Pauline, welcome. Speak to us on your chosen theme, doors, open, closed, music, ministry, a great journey. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Marie. I grew up on a farm near Freeport, Illinois. Yes, northwestern Illinois, just about 15 miles from the Wisconsin border. So I grew up knowing what winter can be like. I hope that I don't need to cough or clear my throat too often because I'm dealing these days with the effects of my many allergies. That's something I live with. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to share how music became so important in my life. As I prepared my presentation, I was filled with such a range of emotions, humbled that the planning committee felt I had something worthwhile to share, then embarrassment that what I was sharing sounds very much like bragging. And then even greater gratitude for the very blessed life I have been granted to live and continue to live yet today. I pray that my sharing of my blessings will help each of you to gratefully reflect on your life. I chose the word doors as the first word in my title because from the day I was born, doors have been open to me. I sadly realize that for many people, there just are not open doors. I'm so glad that I was born into the home of Paul and Ruth Yoder Graybill. And I don't know if you know, my mother was the younger sister of Ora M. Yoder, the founder of the Yoder department store. So she grew up near Shipshewana. My 4 grandparents represented 4 strong, rather prominent Mennonite families: Graybill, Sieber, Yoder, and Berkey. My grandpa, Simon Graybill, was my first pastor where I grew up in the Freeport, Illinois Mennonite Church. My parents had both had a year plus some summers of college to train to be teachers. Mother taught at the Fork School near Middlebury until her marriage and moved to Illinois. And my father taught several years in an 8th grade consolidated school in Illinois until he decided he'd rather be a farmer, as was his pastor farmer father. Both continue to use their teaching skills in many ways. We had many books and periodicals in our home. They were deeply committed to the church and we had daily devotions in our home. Both parents enjoyed the hymns of the church. I enjoyed hearing them sing in church. After my father's death, I inherited a man's quartet book that was his, probably from college days. Mother had a reed pedal organ. How did that happen, I wondered. She often played, and I wish I had talked with her about that. She often played hymns on it. I loved the organ too, and as a child began playing tunes. When I was 7 years old, my parents decided I needed a piano teacher. Paul and Ruth Yoder Kortemeyer were my parents' best friends. I think some of you probably know Ruth. Ruth was my first teacher until she said that I had progressed so well that I needed a professional teacher. So my parents found a good teacher in town, and even though they struggled during some poor farming years, they continued to pay for my private piano lessons until I went away to Goshen College. What a gift. And talk about open doors. And this morning at 3 o'clock, I was lying in bed awake for a while. And it occurred to me that I heard music from the time of conception in my mother's womb as she would play her organ. There I was at the organ with her, or as she sang hymns around the house doing her work. I was with her and heard those hymns. Incredible beginnings. And I wonder, was that music? Oh, and in church, to hear the whole congregation singing week after week after week. Was that music soothing and comforting to me in her womb? Or was it stimulating my brain development? No. It was also a wonderful gift that they always encouraged me to try new things. So the new was never scary for me. When I was 13 or 14 years old in the 8th grade, and neighbors asked me to teach their daughters piano, I did. And I soon had more families wanting me to teach. By the time I graduated from high school, I had 16 students. Also, while still in elementary school, I often accompanied classroom singing. And the music teacher in the Consolidated Dakota Elementary School was also the high school band director. When he needed a tuba player at the beginning of my freshman high school year, he came to me to be it. Of course, he knew that I already read music and could learn very quickly how to play the tuba. And that worked out well because my parents could not have afforded an instrument rental while also paying for my piano lessons. This was a fun open door. I played in band all 4 years, played in ensembles, music contests, etc., and won awards. During the high school years, I also accompanied the choirs and the musicals that the school put on. And I sang in a girls' vocal trio that sang for special events at many churches in the region. One of the girls had a brother a couple of years older who was designated as driver until his sister had her license. And then he still traveled along as chaperone and became my very good friend. I made a decision to follow Christ and to be baptized when I was 11. This involved my decision to open my life to God and God's leading through the Holy Spirit, which has given me direction, courage, and joy for these many, many years. My life has been so blessed, so full of open doors. My church, Freeport Mennonite Church, where our Don Losser later served as pastor, also encouraged my gifts. Of course, there was no piano in the church at that time, but I sometimes was asked to lead singing at Sunday evening services, where I also gave a topic some evenings, and I had leadership responsibilities in the youth group. I also was a teacher in our large summer Bible schools. So my ministry gifts were being developed by this rural old Mennonite church way back, long before women spoke from the pulpit, unless they were missionaries from around the world. Thanks be to God for this nurturing congregation. Between my junior and senior years of high school, 1948, I served in summer VS, voluntary service, in Chicago at the Bethel Mennonite Church. Bethel is located on the near southwest side of Chicago's downtown, surrounded by huge public housing projects. James and Rowena Lark served there many years as pastor. Our VS group was there to prepare for, invite, teach, and lead in the huge summer Bible school, with children coming from the projects too. I loved that experience, and I found that I loved Chicago. It would be 6 years later, 1954, when my husband Leroy would be called to be the founding pastor of Lombard Mennonite Church in a western suburb of Chicago, that we moved to the Chicago area. Chicago city or suburbs would be our home for all but one of the next 55 years when we moved to northern Indiana to retire. I always knew that I would go to college like my parents. And even though our family dentist wanted me to train to be a dental hygienist and work with him, and even though the Rock City Bank invited me to be a staff person at the bank, he found out from the high school that I had done well in all of the commerce or business courses I took, typing, bookkeeping, shorthand, etc. I knew that I was called to study more music. But before moving to Goshen College, I spent the summer working in Freeport at the Kraft Foods factory as an administrative assistant in the office. That was also a good experience. And until college graduation, I spent every summer vacation working in a factory office in Freeport. And during that first summer after high school graduation, I also had a weekly children's program on the Freeport radio station, which was called Story Time. Another good experience. Interesting open door. Looking back and reflecting on my life, I can gratefully say that from the time of my birth, during my first 18 years, many doors opened in front of me, and I joyfully walked through them as I was in many ways being nurtured in music ministry and toward congregational and institutional ministries. Goshen College was a wonderful experience. I sang in the a cappella choir during sophomore and junior years, and then I was asked to be the director of the nurses course the college wanted to start at the beginning of my senior year. All through college, I taught piano to children in the area who found teachers through Goshen College. That was quite a while before the community school of the arts was started, but that was probably the beginnings. One of those young people was Judy Kaufman, now my niece-in-law, Judy Kennel. During sophomore, junior, and senior years, I served as director of music at St. Mark's Methodist Church here in Goshen. I was also invited to be student assistant to Mary Oyer in the Fine Arts Department, and also to be student assistant to Lois Guiney in the Commerce Department, where I had tested out of most of the courses in this department, thereby getting a minor in commerce. I am very grateful for these beautiful women's role models. in my life. In my sophomore year, I served as co-chair of the YPCA Service Committee. I was elected for my senior year to be president of the YWCA, which meant I served as vice president of the YPCA, while Russ Lichty was elected president of the YMCA and therefore president of the YPCA. In 1951, my junior year, the education department began the Christopher Dock Club. I was appointed editor of the new club's publication, Skip Back News. I was an active member of Christian Workers Band, and I took a seminary course on youth ministry. I remember telling Richard Yorty, who was my home pastor during my college years, that I would like to study youth ministry. I don't know why. I wasn't aware of Mennonite churches that had youth ministers at that time. But guess what? I ended up marrying Leroy Kennel, a fellow GC student. The summer after I got my BA and he got his MDiv equivalent, and he had become assistant pastor at Metamora Mennonite Church immediately after graduation. Within several months, the senior pastor died and Leroy was appointed acting pastor. During that 1 year at Metamora, I taught piano and I directed the church choir. I think Irene Gross sang in that choir. Our first child, John, was born the day the church voted daily not to extend 24-year-old Leroy's tenure to be the senior pastor of this large congregation. Almost immediately, Leroy was invited to have conversations about starting a new church in Lombard, a western suburb of Chicago. We both saw this as an exciting new challenge and opportunity. Wow, a closed door for Leroy became now a great open door. I was delighted. As we were beginning this new congregation in 1954, Leroy was invited to teach communication here at Goshen College for a year. I took care of our new baby, John, and taught piano to students at Bethany Christian High School. And we commuted each weekend to Lombard for that school year before the church had built a little parsonage for us to live in. The Lombard experience was good and was significant in many ways. The congregation became a strong Anabaptist presence in the western suburbs. We were noteworthy in 1956 for being the first, probably the first old Mennonite congregation where it was decided that women would not be required to wear the covering in worship. At a special meeting of conference delegates, it was finally decided that the church, having a strong theological and practical foundation for their decision, would be allowed an exception. And women would not be required to wear the covering as long as the pastor's wife would wear the covering at all. My statement that I could not do this, I felt it implied a double standard, and besides, I wanted to be very active in community outreach and relationships. It was a heavy load though for Leroy because immediately conference discontinued the small subsidy they were giving the church. And they requested the Mennonite Board of Missions to discontinue the small subsidy that they were providing. So Leroy went searching and found a job to teach remedial reading at Hinsdale High School. Also, we were removed from membership on conference committees for just a few years. Another very significant action on our part was to rent an apartment we owned in Lombard to the very first African-American family to live in this suburb. Prejudice against Blacks was very strong, as we had experienced earlier when we had invited Black friends who lived in Chicago to come to our home for a meal and to visit. As they drove on the street to our home, they were stopped by police and asked, "What are you doing here?" When an apartment became available, we contacted the not-for-profit group Home Opportunities Made Equal, to inquire if they had a family who might be brave enough to come to Lombard. And they suggested the Wright family, W-R-I-G-H-T. So when we made the rental agreement with this family, we informed village officials of what we were doing. Leroy already had a good relationship with some of the officials. We also informed the other renters in the building, including one couple who were members of our church, and became very good friends and helpful to the Wright family. The editor of the Lombardian, the local weekly newspaper, heard of what we were doing, and he was not sympathetic. Then there were threats of violence. We feared Molotov cocktails would be thrown to our house. We were threatened with those. It was a really scary time, and we prayed a lot. We moved baby Jay's crib farther away from the window. This was early 1966. I think it was early in the year. Fortunately, the police department became very alert and supportive, sending extra patrols on our street and also in the area around the apartment building where the Wright family had moved in. We always said that this friendly couple and their baby were the right family to move into Lombard. They attended our church. While we were serving the church through 1966, I taught piano in our home with as many as 40 weekly students. When Anne Brunk, Mabel Brunk's sister-in-law, invited me to teach music in the Queen Bee School, where she was principal, I saw another open door and accepted, and I taught there from 1956 to 1962. That was grades 1 through 8. I also directed our church's children's choir. The senior choir director was Marvin Dirks, professor at Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Chicago and a charter member of the church. During these years at Lombard, 3 more children were born, Rita, Janice, and Jay. Though I was very busy teaching music and being pastor's wife, my husband and 4 young children were the precious priorities in my life. After leaving the Lombard congregation, he had also earned his PhD. Leroy took an interim position at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, where he taught homiletics. It was an interim appointment. He also became interim pastor at Irving Park Presbyterian Church on the far north side of Chicago, and we lived there in the church's parsonage, the manse, of course. When completing those 2 interim positions, he accepted a position to teach and do a research project for West Virginia University in Morgantown. With his encouragement, I saw this as another wonderful open door for me, because as a professor's wife, I could study at the university without paying tuition. So I enrolled in a Master of Music degree program and received the degree in music education and choral conducting. Also with graduate level piano performance. Got the degree in 1969, after that 1 year. My thesis was research on the ability of kindergarten and first grade children to reproduce music intervals. In the meantime, Leroy received an invitation to teach back in Illinois at Bethany Theological Seminary, the Church of the Brethren Seminary in Oak Brook, just a few miles south of Lombard Mennonite Church. He was overjoyed at this opportunity, and after just 1 year in West Virginia, we moved back to Illinois. I sought music positions, but could find no openings at that late date. So there was an open door waiting for me at Bethany, where I could study free for an MATH degree to gain an even better theological foundation for my church music work. Furthermore, I was hired to be the seminary music director, choir director, and organist, a part-time position. I found an organ instructor and took organ lessons for 2 years. Goshen College had not had an organ when I was a student. I thoroughly enjoyed the organ and the Bethany experience. I received the Master of Arts in Theology degree in 1971. I continued my music position there, but with Leroy's urging, I applied for and was accepted to enter a doctoral program. He thought there was an easier school I could have gone to, but I said, no, I need to go to Northwestern where they have an outstanding music department. I applied for and was accepted to enter the doctoral program in music education at Northwestern University. I commuted to Evanston for classes in 1972 when I became a candidate for the PhD degree, and then continued the research for my dissertation. Peter Christian Lucken, Northwestern's first dean of music. You probably know him best for having composed "The Lord bless you and keep you," that wonderful blessing. Yes. It's about my dissertation is a biography of his life. And of course, Northwestern is happy to have it. And it was a joy for me to write because he loved music, but most of all, he loved church music. The church music department that he founded was his greatest joy. I finally completed the dissertation in 1980. But a lot had happened in the meantime. I had also accepted a part-time position at nearby Elmhurst College teaching piano. I taught there in 1970 to 73 when I resigned because I wanted to spend more time on my dissertation and the pay was not worth my time. The music department would have liked me to stay. And I had been invited to take a one-year interim position at the University of Illinois in Chicago to teach music methods and materials for the elementary education department. They had a huge backlog of students who were required to take this course. It was a good one-year part-time experience. In the summer of 1974, Oscar Roth, who we know has passed, choral director at a suburban high school, had a severe brain injury from an explosion at the school where he worked summers in maintenance. I was hired as interim choral director for the first semester while he slowly recovered from the accident. So now I had experience teaching music in elementary, high school, university, and graduate school settings. Amazing series of opportunities. One of my most thrilling experiences was to lead singing at Mennonite General Assembly in 1975 at Eureka College in Eureka, Illinois. And to direct the large conference choir, which sang portions of The Messiah, accompanied by a volunteer orchestra. Do any of you remember that? And again in 1977 at Estes Park in Colorado at Mennonite General Assembly. Also, while taking classes at Northwestern, I saw a notice that First Presbyterian Church of Glen Ellyn, the first suburb west of Lombard, was seeking a minister of music. I applied and was hired to direct 4 choirs and serve on the worship committee of this huge 1,700 member church. I served there from 71 to 75 when the previous person in this position moved back to the area and wanted his old job back. What is happening? A closed door. And about the same time, the door at Bethany Seminary closed when they had hired a a female instructor, and she wanted also the music position. 2 closed doors. The only professional doors closed to me in all these years. I could have decided that I had enough to do working on my dissertation, but I felt a calling to do more seminary study. So with the many seminaries in the Chicago area and the arrangement for cross-enrollment, any of the seminaries, I studied in 1976 and 77 at Garrett Evangelical in Evanston. They had a whole department of Christian education. We would say Christian formation now, with well-known professors like Rosemary Luther. I don't know if you've heard of her. It was while studying at Garrett that fellow students and professors named my pastoral gifts. So I decided to enroll again at Bethany to take courses to meet the MDiv degree requirements, which I completed in 1978. But I still thought I should be a music professor. In the spring of 1978, I applied for the open choral music position at Rosary College in another suburb. I made it to the final interview, but I was not accepted for the position. Still another closed door. Why? I could not understand this closed door, so I called the chair of the committee for the reason. It was because of the answer I gave for one of the questions the committee had asked about my previous experience. But the committee had misunderstood what I said. Amazing. God, what do you have up your sleeve for me now? In a very short time, I received a call from the Yorkville Presbyterian Church in Elmhurst with an invitation to interview for their staff opening. It all went very well, and I became director of Christian education. They asked me to function as assistant pastor, but they could not give me that title because the congregation was not ready for a female pastor. This was 1978. I worked with a gifted young pastor, and we were a great team. In 4 years, we had turned the aging, ailing congregation around to be thriving and growing, mostly with young, vibrant families. Sounds familiar to us here, doesn't it, with what's happening in our church here? And people were introducing me as their assistant pastor. I hated to leave. But in 1982, the Chicago Area Mennonites CAM organization was seeking an executive coordinator. This is another story of which I will only say it was very fulfilling for me. I accepted it, and I have written about the experience elsewhere. In late 1989, the decision was made to end the position because the funds just were not enough to really continue it, and River Place had other ideas about what should be happening in Chicago, and they had some good, big influence. In early 1990, I was right after that, I was invited to resurrect the Chicago Mennonite Learning Center. And of course, you know that Dwight Grieser had been very active on the board for some years. So I retired the position at the Presbyterian. No, I'm skipping something here. Okay, so I was invited to resurrect the Chicago Mennonite Learning Center with grades 1 through 8. Another story. I served as administrator and then as director of development until 1996 when I resigned to retire. Russ and Marsh Blakely were administrators there for several years. During the 1970s and 1980s, I was asked to lead workshops or give lectures in many settings, either on music and worship themes or Christian formation topics, including at my churches where I had been active and for the Chicago area Presbytery events, at Garrett Theological Seminary Lay Pastor School, at Evangelical Theological Seminary, which was in Naperville, I believe, Chicago Theological Seminary, at Goshen College's Festival of Church Music, at Goshen College's Festival of the People, at AMBS's our seminary's Pastors Week, at Illinois Mennonite Conference meetings, and others. Also during the 70s and 80s, I served as adjunct instructor in either music and worship or Christian formation at Northern Baptist Seminary, at Bethany, at North Park Seminary, and for longer periods of time at AMBS, 1979 to 80, and I think it was the 83, 84 school year. Taught as an adjunct, a course at Mundelein College and College of DuPage. All of these were part-time positions. In fact, I don't think I ever had a full-time position. And then after I wrote this, it occurred to me, but yes, those summer office jobs at Freeport in the factories would have been full-time jobs. Not the music jobs. In 1988, Leroy was installed as founding pastor of Christ Community Mennonite Church in Schaumburg, a city northwest of Chicago. It's called a suburb, but it's very much, it's a city as large as some very well-known cities, actually. It's very prominent. Some of you probably have been there. In 1990, I was installed as co-pastor. I directed the children's choirs also and played piano whenever there was no other member who could play. We served until 2009, finally retiring and moving to northern Indiana. I taught piano again in Indiana until 2020 when the pandemic caused shutdowns. And since moving to Goshen in 2012, I have been blessed to play piano and organ often for services at College Mennonite Church and piano concerts at Greencroft. I have 2 coming up yet in December. One at Evergreen Place, the assisted living facility, and one at the community center, Jennings Auditorium. It was about 2006 that I realized that I was losing some of my piano skills. I wasn't as accurate on the leaps. You know, you have to be able to know where exactly to land on the keyboard. So I made the decision to play my piano much more frequently and soon to make it a daily experience of approximately an hour. And I'm almost at the point now where I think I should spend about 45 minutes during the AM hours and another 45 minutes in the evening, because as I'm getting older, that's a little more important. I don't want to lose it because it's a blessing to be able to create the music. Leroy had begun showing signs of failing memory already in 2009, and then he was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia a couple of years later. With good care at this cancer center here at Goshen Hospital, he was healed of the leukemia, but increasingly the dementia caused deterioration. I was privileged to take care of him until July 2018, when he required health care at Elkhart Meadows. 7 months later, he was relieved of his helplessness as he passed away on Valentine's Day, February 14, 2019. During the time of Leroy's illness and since his death, grieving has been touched and lessened through my daily playing my piano. Another tremendous blessing of my lifelong journey with music. The fact that I am always needing to prepare music to play in public is such an inspiration and joy, even at my age of 90 3/4 years. I am so blessed that doors are still open to enjoy and to share the gift of music.
After one of our committee meetings of the curriculum committee, it was Phyllis Stutzman who turned to me and said, I wonder whether there's a story that would talk about how music was meaningful in Pauline's life. I guess we have had that answer, don't we? It was a long story. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're going to forsake the time of questions because of time. And she has chosen 2 carols for us to sing. So she'll be at the piano and lead us to singing. So let's stand and sing together. And at the end of that will be our time of dismissal. Thank you, Pauline.
You're welcome. If anybody wanted to be able to lead the work, I love this. How about singing the first and the last verses of Joy to the World? I think it's probably. How about the first and second verses of O Come All Ye Faithful?